Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Maya Auditorium. Some of you may not know that the Maya Auditorium is now being used once a week for a meditation session. So I'm actually going to ask you to all close your eyes, and I'm going to say one word, and I'd like to know how you react. So please, at this point, close your eyes. Mycenas. Open your eyes. I can imagine three possible reactions. Mycenas. Mycenas. Ah. And Mycenas. Ugh. There are many different and complex reactions to that wonderful act of philanthropy and patronage. So welcome today to a session on stories of art and money, a panel convened in honor of our new exhibition, Peacock Room Remix, Darren Waterston's Filthy Lucre. Now, Darren's inventive installation reimagines the famous room, the Peacock Room, as a splendid ruin, collapsing under the weight of its own excess. But it's also a three-dimensional rendering of the bitter animosity that overtook the once great friendship between patron and painter, between James McNeill Whistler and his patron, Frederick Leyland. Darren has taken Whistler's work, he's recast it in a way that provokes us to think about the value of art in society, the value of artistic independence, and the often tricky relationships between artist and patron. Hence the title of Darren's work, Filthy Lucre. But for those of you who might assume that this is a flippant, modern gloss, quite the contrary. It's very historically based, because it's based on the title that Whistler himself gave to that corrosively nasty painting he made of his once great patron. So if you go into our exhibition, you'll see in the middle of the room an installation, Darren's Filthy Lucre, and then an accompanying exhibition put together by our wonderful curator of American art, Lee Glazer. And you'll see this exhibition, small exhibition, framed by two large paintings, both by Whistler, of his patron, Frederick Leyland. And one is this majestic, Velázquez-like Hidalgo figure. Pan to the other end of the room, and you see this enormous work, the gold scab eruption in Filthy Lucre. That was Whistler's own title for this venomous painting he did of his once great friend. So Peacock Room Remix and the accompanying exhibitions that Lee Glazer has put together are a new direction for the Sackler, as we begin a series of dialogues. If you're feeling prissy, call them conversations. If you're feeling more robust, call them confrontations. Confrontations between past and present. So one of our friends of the museum remarked, with a wit that perhaps Oscar Wilde might grudgingly have enjoyed, she said, Peacock Room Remix, Darren's work, is the Peacock Room meets the picture of Dorian Gray. As we call it, it's Whistler gone wild. Now, Lee Glazer, the curator of American art at the Freer Sackler, presciently saw the potential of Darren's work for the Sackler. even while it was in the planning stages at Mass MoCA. Lee deserves a huge round of applause. And it's Lee who will now introduce today's distinguished panel of speakers. Not quite sure where they are, but...
Thanks, Julian. Good afternoon, everyone. There are too many members of the Freer and Sackler staff who helped make this program possible to thank everyone individually, because we'd be here all day. But I really couldn't live with myself if I didn't give a special shout out to three individuals: Nancy Mickelwright, the head of scholarly and public programs here at the museum, and then particularly Ari Post and Zeynep Samavi, who worked closely with me on conceptualizing this program and oversaw all of the details, large and small, that went into making it happen today. So thank you very much. And thanks as well to Darren Waterston, the artist of Filthy Lucre, the centerpiece, as you've heard and I hope already seen, of Peacock Room Remix. As Julian mentioned, Filthy Lucre was created in collaboration with Mass MoCA in North Adams, Massachusetts. And so we're also greatly indebted to Joe Thompson, the director of Mass MoCA, and Susan Cross, the curator, who invited Darren to create a site-specific work, a mural, that in true Whistlerian fashion morphed into something much bigger, an immersive but modular interior that can travel to multiple venues. So we're just so grateful to all of you for this opportunity to bring the Peacock Room into confrontation with a contemporary work of art. Now, when we here at the Freer and Sackler set the opening date of May 16th for Peacock Room Remix, Darren Waterston's Filthy Lucre, we didn't really think about the fact that it was going to cap off a week of modern and contemporary art sales. And I'm sure if any of you all have picked up a newspaper this week, you've been well aware of art and money in the news. In fact, the New York Times breathlessly described it on Thursday as a vast outpouring of money that amazed even the wealthy and the celebrities who flocked to the auction floor. So I think that the timing of our exhibition, and especially today's accompanying program, couldn't be more perfect. Filthy Lucre does many things, but one of the most compelling is the reconsideration of the Peacock Room as a story, as Julian said, of both art and money, as Whistler himself described it. Now, interestingly, Whistler himself was always comfortable speaking the language of the market. He was also charming, funny, a born entertainer, and a great performer. He dazzled people with his wit and was undeniably brilliant. He was also insubordinate, thin-skinned, and difficult. And he was determined to use all of these seemingly contradictory character traits as tools to craft a persona, to seduce collectors, secure an art historical legacy, and of course, make money. Whistler understood that art existed in a larger system of economic exchange, not unlike the one we inhabit today, but he maintained that it was the creator, not the consumer or the impersonal forces of the market, that should set the price and ascribe value. Now, of course, you all probably know that just last Wednesday, a stainless steel bust of Louis XIV by Jeff Koons sold for more than $10 million, a drop in the bucket of the billion-dollar-plus week at Christie's. The 2,000 pounds that Whistler demanded and failed to receive for the Peacock Room pales in comparison. So at this particular moment in time, with the Peacock Room facing off against Filthy Lucre, I think it's especially important to ask, what exactly is the value of art? What does it mean? And despite existing in an often infuriating or irrational environment, why does art still seem to be so important, so valuable to all of us? This afternoon, we've got a remarkable group of panelists from all corners of the art world and beyond who will take on these topics and more in what I know will be a provocative discussion. So going from left to right, we've got moderating the panel, Scott Simon, one of our most admired writers and broadcasters. And of course, you all know he's best known around these parts for his weekly NPR broadcast that he just came off of, Weekend Edition Saturday. Sitting next to Scott is Brian Daly. Brian is an artist who's worked in the evolving marketplace for over 30 years, and he also has experience on museum committees and 5 years serving on the Board of Trustees for the Phillips Collection here in town. Next we have John Ott, a professor of art history at James Madison University, who was a contributor to the Filthy Lucre catalog and an expert on art consumption, patronage, and markets in the United States. Melissa Chu is the director of the Hirshhorns Museum and Sculpture Garden, as well as a leading expert and scholar on contemporary Asian and Asian American art. Next to Melissa is Georgina Adam, a journalist and author. Georgina has covered the global art market for the last 30 years. She's currently the art market editor for the Art newspaper and writes a weekly art market column for the Financial Times. And of course, last and certainly not least is Darren Waterston, the wonderful artist and good friend who opened the doors to this entire event and exhibition with his installation, Filthy Lucre. One quick thing before Scott takes it away. All of our panelists are also accomplished authors, and a selection of their publications are available for sale, so I hope you brought money afterwards in the Sackler gift shop. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and for inviting me. And we'll get right to it. I want to tell you that in about 45 minutes, we'll be turning to you for any questions that you have. So you might want to prepare them in your mind, write them down on a slip of paper. Let me begin with a question for all of you, and I guess we might as well go in turn. What puts the value on a piece of art? What do each of you think?
I think that that art represents, if it can represent a particular time and place in which it's made, I think that it holds a value it can hold a complexity of values around a political value, a social value, an aesthetic value. I mean, it can hold integrity in so many different arenas. It can be represented as currency, and where the actual object itself is imbued as a sort of monetary object and a holding for capital, and which is what we've seen of late. But when you think of the history of art, mostly these were objects of transformation, of transfiguration, of contemplation, and devotion, and so. If you take those particular ideas and actually and sort of blanket that over the kind of incredible, unprecedented feeding frenzy of art as a global commodity, it's interesting to think about it as a devotional object, as an object of transfiguration and transgression, and so it's complex. I think that it's very multivalent.
Georgina?
I'm from London. I spent my morning at the National Gallery of Art here, and I suppose that as a person who writes about the money in art, I spend most of my time looking at the value and the monetary value. But I think it's a wonderful thing to be able to go to an art gallery, which on top of that here in Washington is free, which I think is fantastic. And it does take you to another place, and to my mind that's the value of art. It goes far beyond its monetary value. It's a symbolic, as you say. I echo totally what Darren says. I think it's wonderful to be able to take it out of our everyday life, and that art gives us something else that money actually can't buy.
Yeah.
We will get to the money part.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's the title of this panel, right? So, I mean, I think what's interesting at this very moment in time is that there is so much focus on the monetary value of art, and that comes with record-breaking prices. But I think certainly a museum perspective, and as an art historian, we think of historical value, and that is, what does this artwork say about the time in which it was produced? And I would also say that it's conditional, that in fact sometimes this is evolving. So even though we think of an artist's work as being particularly important today, that may change in 5 or 10 years' time. There are many artistic figures who were highly valued and regarded in their time, and they have not been seen in the greater kind of historical trajectory. So I just want to put that out, that this is also an evolving kind of thing in terms of the value of art, the historical value.
John?
Yeah, also as a historian, I'm probably more interested with the cultural value of something, which often can take longer to kind of work out. I thought the way you've been describing it as something that really tells us about a time and place is that cultural value, and that's of course different from market value, right? So you have art and you have money. But the two are always intertwined in really complex ways, and that's one of the things I love about Filthy Lucre, is it really focuses on that as a seed for the entire project. And so, for example, if I'm looking at an artist who maybe isn't well known today, but was very popular in their day, and I publish an article on it, that will contribute to its market value down the road. Not because I'm a great author, right? But because value is established by how often something's been published, exhibited, and so on. So it's really impossible to get these, and Darren was saying this as well, to disentangle the kinds of value to which we ascribe art.
I think simply put, in historical terms, I'd just say patron, the viewer, the collector, and then the market. But I also think that the art historian plays a very important role. I mean, after all, it was Caravaggio's work that was lost for 300 years, basically, until around 1926, when someone decided to write about him, and all of a sudden Caravaggio became reinvigorated. I mean, he's very somewhat popular in his own time, but I think that the combination of those things is what ends up making it. But the patron and the viewer, I think, are the critical parts of it. It's the people who actually enjoy it and consume it.
Yeah. Well, let me get to the filthy part. Find that always makes people perk up. And direct the question to you, Georgina, but please others chime in. We talk about crazy prices today. Are they, when you compare them to maybe what they've been at certain times in the past? I mean, you used to have to be crazy rich to own any kind of painting.
Well, you have to be crazy, crazy rich today.
That too.
But yeah, the prices are completely. I think even if you take the huge prices that were paid in the past, for example, for the Blue Boy that went into the Huntington, even if you scale them up to today's prices, you don't get to the sort of levels we're seeing today. And I mean, I think John is probably better placed than I am as an art historian to talk about earlier times. But I think that the reasons that these prices are so huge is to do with a huge amount of liquidity in the world today, more liquidity, and also this sheer number of billionaires in the world. And if you look at the Forbes list, I think there were another 280 added last year to the Forbes list of the number of billionaires in the world. So actually what you're getting is a sort of billionaires boxing match going on here, in which, they're vying to get the top work. And particularly we saw this week, I was there at the auction seeing this Picasso selling for $190 million. Now, if you wanted a sort of super yacht, a mega yacht, you can actually get one. It takes a while, it takes a lot of money, but you can buy it. But there's actually only one Picasso like that out there, and I think, and there's, it is ultimately a question of supply and demand, and at the moment there is demand amongst the mega rich for these mega trophy works.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I would add to that by saying that what we haven't seen before, because there are a number of elements to this that we haven't seen before. We've had highs and lows in the art market and in people really wanting to assemble collections. But there are a couple of things in the mix which are new. I think that firstly, it's very much a global phenomenon. We have not seen this ever before. It is beyond Europe and the States. We're seeing serious collections being formed in places like Brazil, China, United Arab Emirates, and other places in the Mideast. So the new global wealth is wanting, and the new kind of wealthy are wanting to acquire art and build serious collections and then even build their own museums. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is we're also at a point in time when there's, for some countries, there's a great deal of national pride. And I'm thinking specifically of places where you wouldn't ordinarily think of them as cultural capitals. And so museum building and collection building are very much a part of that. And if you look at game-changing acquisition budgets, I can think of two. A number of years ago, there was the private museum in South Korea, in Seoul, the Leum or Samsung Museum. I thought their budget was rather large in comparison to American museums because it was around $150 million a year. Right? So that was a sizable budget for international art. But the Qataris today blow everyone out of the water. Yeah. So we're talking about $1.5 billion a year. Right? So that is actually a game-changing, market-changing amount. That's not, now neither of those are probably going to continue on forever, but that's a significant contributor to especially the blue-chip modern works, I think, because if you're in collection building mindset, you have to have certain works, right? And so with a budget like that, you can really change the market.
But let me follow up a bit and turn to you, John, then I know you want to say something too, Darren. I mean, I say this very proudly as a Chicagoan, and a place I've written about with great affection and esteem, the Art Institute of Chicago, was that collection, I think it's fair to say, a number of decades ago, was built by people who had more money than taste, but said, we want to advertise the fact that we're a world capital now. Tell us what to buy, we'll bring it in here, we'll be proud of it. And today they are. And I don't think there's anybody sitting here who would think that wasn't a good thing to do. So I wonder, is this such a new wrinkle? Hasn't this been going on with museums and galleries for quite some time?
I think if you adjust it for inflation, the prices are larger, although that's always tricky to figure out exactly, right? But I think what was happening in the Gilded Age is the same order of magnitude. The prices are bigger now, relatively speaking. But people like the Havemeyers and the Potters, who are building the Art Institute of Chicago, are also buying works that are from overseas, maybe not from China or India, but they're from France. Mm-hmm. They're buying them at public auctions, which are very highly advertised and have record-setting prices on a regular basis. Yeah. And the press loves it. This stuff is being covered in great detail, like the exploits that were happening this last week. And so, there are Havemeyers of today who are building the same kinds of collections. And the patterns, to me, I'm a historian, so I'm biased, but I see a lot of parallels between the two eras. Yeah,
and it was considered a civilizing step too. We're not just about making money here. We want something to be done for the good of our civilization. Darren.
I think, though, this time is a little bit different. I agree with Melissa that the liquidity in this market, and not just this market, the liquidity throughout the world is so much cash out there that people are able to pay, which I think are pretty high prices for things that typically wouldn't. And I think the market is almost a consumer market versus an investor market. And there's a lot of investors that have entered in the art world that's a lot different than what I remember from the 1970s in art school. That said, I'll also give you an example. I was just down in Cuba in March and went to the art school down in Cuba and saw this student painting, very nice painting, great work. And I asked him how much the price of the painting was, and he said $8,000. And I thought, $8,000 for an art school, it seemed rather high to me. But it's what people apparently are willing to just come into Cuba, and there's been a lot of examples of collectors just coming down in droves in Cuba and collecting the art. Yeah. It has driven it up dramatically just because people will pay any price. It doesn't matter if it's going to distort the market. They'll pay it, and I think that's in part what's also happening. That's different than I think what we've seen in the past.
Well, and 2 years ago, you couldn't have brought anything back from Cuba.
Art. Sorry?
There's always ways.
Well, there are ways.
It's a lot. The Rubin collection has quite a few of it.
Fit into a cigar tube, you could do it.
I'm interested that you spoke about distortion of the market, because I do think it's necessary to point out that approximately the figures that we have, which are reasonably unreliable, of the total value of the art market, approximately half of that is through auction. But the auctions are a little bit distorting, because at the very top end there's red-hot competition to get hold of the best works of art, and a considerable amount, those of you who read the articles in the press will probably have seen the word guarantees, irrevocable bids, and I think this is also inflating the market to an extent. The auction houses are so keen to get the best works of art that they give away most of their commissions, and they guarantee the price, i.e. they will buy it themselves if it doesn't sell for the price they agreed. And I think this has had an inflating and a distorting effect on the market as well.
And Trini, when you say the best works of art, is that, you're talking about the names, the 20 or so names that are most familiar?
It is, yes. It's between 50 and 100 names that everyone wants. And this is, of course, a problem of supply and demand as well. Particularly, obviously, names like Picasso, Warhol, colossally, and remember these were also very prolific artists, so there's a lot of their works around, and a market, in order to function, does need to have supply.
And I mean, how much of this, I wondered too, is just the pure sport of it all right now, and the kind of performative aspects within this particular rarefied air, like how much of the collecting that goes on is actually really sort of thoughtful, sort of financial, financial planning, and this is where my money's going to go, and it's going to be safe here. I mean, how much of that is taken into account, and then how much of it is just the pure kind of spectacle of it, and the sort of incredible sort of standoff between, this very, very small.
Well, maybe a question for whoever wants to take it. That you raised something that maybe we should just not assume. In fact, historically, is art a good investment, as opposed to a block of downtown Manhattan?
No.
And I concur.
Yeah, I mean, people looking at the numbers have crunched it, and it doesn't perform very well relative to just basic equities or even the bond market, is my understanding. So if you can capture something at the right time and flip it, then you can make a lot of money. So, but, the chances are, what was this one quote that I came across? An art critic writing in the 50s was talking to a prestigious collector whose name I'm forgetting now, but was, basically, how did you have the foresight to buy all these Van Goghs, all these Seurats, all these Cézannes at a time when they weren't, selling for very much? And he's like, why does no one ever ask me about all the Barbizon paintings that I bought back for $50,000 and now are worth a tenth of that, right? So in the aggregate, right, collections tend to lose money.
There is a new collector base that's come into it, I think, over the last 20, 30 years. Those are the people that come in, and a gallery dealer tells me the story, so it's not one I'm trying to relay from my own experiences, but the person put a $50,000 payment on a piece of work and as a reserve, and then came back with a friend, and she was asking whether or not it's going to increase in value by 10 times in 5 years. And that's a whole different type of person collecting than I think the person who really just loved the artwork, like a Duncan Phillips, for example, bought the work in Europe and the Impressionists not because he thought it was going to increase in value. I think he just loved the work, and the prices happened to be very good. So I think that type of a person, and actually I'll tell you this, the gallery dealer refused to sell it to him on that basis.
The gallery dealer refused to sell?
Refused to sell it.
Actually, I mean, this is why the preference has been for new collectors to go to auctions, because actually galleries won't sell to a lot of people. Because that's their role, in fact, to really place the artwork in serious collections and museum collections. And in fact, that's what artists expect. So,
I mean, because we're sitting so close to K Street, I don't immediately want to think in terms of litigation, but you can actually refuse to sell to someone?
Yes, you can say it's not available. And that's the whole point. That's why people go to auction. Yeah, that's why people go to auction, because it's all comers. So if you're a new collector, you end up at the auction probably first. So until you gain a reputation as a serious collector who won't flip the works.
Yeah. I don't know, in all the incredible international contemporary art markets where it's just this feeding frenzy of consumption, I don't know how discerning galleries are to like whose money.
I think you'd be surprised. I mean, I've heard stories of galleries being approached by Russian collectors and just saying, I want that work, it's worth $1 million, I have cash in my bag. And they say, no, they don't want the cash. So I mean, that's an extreme example, but it does happen. And, you know, I mean, I would like to go back actually to your comment on sport and spectacle, because I do think that it's a kind of different profile of collectors that we have today from even before. And I think that I do actually think it's been brought out by art fairs and other kind of convening points, where once collectors kind of gathered around maybe museums or exhibitions or galleries, now you have a much larger kind of convening around art fairs, which have become more global, whether you look at Art Basel in Miami, Hong Kong and Basel. And these become more social activities, right? So it's a different kind of experience, I think, today for collectors, and many are attracted by that social experience first, and then they become collectors. So it's a little bit different from that idea of this really private enterprise of getting to know artists on the contemporary art side, then the galleries, and then, you know, collecting. So it's a little different.
Did you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to say the art fairs, I think, have just absolutely obliterated many of the possibilities of sort of cultivating stewardship and education and allowing people to, on their own autonomy, find their own course through their relationship with art. And when all of this is when much of the interactions with art is in the kind of marketplace frenzy of like selling livestock at an art fair, you know, I mean, that is just the most, you know, these environments are the most, you know, incompatible to contemplating any work of art.
I've never met an artist who feels comfortable at an art fair.
Yes and no, but I would say, nevertheless, that what people don't know is that actually most of the works of art that are sold through an art fair are at actually quite a low price level, the bulk of the sales. And I do think that art fairs have been a way of bringing young, new collectors into the art world. They're intimidated by going to a gallery. So I think that is a positive side of them. Mm-hmm. Then people, you know, they've got their foot in the stirrup, so to speak, and then they will progress up. Not all of them will end up very, very rich collectors. So I totally agree, Darren. It's a hopeless way to look at art. It's horrible to see 16 different artists in one booth, or 6. And you don't get an idea of the depth of their art. But on the other hand, it might spark your curiosity. If the gallery owner is nice and welcoming, then you could go round to the gallery afterwards. If you like the work of one artist, go and look at a show of it. So I think we shouldn't be too negative about the phenomenon of art fairs. I think they have contributed to expanding knowledge and interest in art and expanding the art market itself.
I think the gallery dealer, though, is kind of in between on this one, because they have a brick and mortar operation that costs them $20,000 a month to have in their gallery, if it's in Chelsea or even higher in some of the more locations. At the same time, the art fairs is where they're getting their money. And they don't know really whether or not they should have this gallery, but people seem to want a storefront on this. And it's a real challenge for them. They like it because it's very convenient, and people can come in and they can do a lot of art in one time. And I think the serious collector likes that convenience.
Let me just interrupt a bit before to follow up on something you said, Melissa, when you said never met an artist who's comfortable at an art fair. I'm just going to bet if they sell something, they can figure out a way to be comfortable.
Yeah, but it's the experience. It's having your work. It's.
But the experience when you go home with $100,000 in your pocket is so much richer.
Doesn't mean you have to be there. Doesn't mean you have to be there at the art fair. I'm just wondering, having known and interviewed artists over the years, if some of that isn't just them playing the role they know they're supposed to play as the temperamental artist. And the fact is, this is livelihood. This is their business.
I think Jean Baldessari said it right when he said, for an artist to go to an art fair is like walking in on your parents making love. that kind
The
of
transaction.
transaction
It's the
stuff.
transaction,
You know
right?
they
Which
do
is
it,
at the
but
heart
you
of
don't want to see it.
You don't want to know what goes in the sausage casing. Yeah.
I don't think we have to pursue that part.
We get the picture.
Well, but that raised this question. When we talk about some of the fantastic prices, is there any kind of trickle-down effect for artists who are working for a living and for recognition now? Is there any correlation between the, I'll make up a number, $30 million paid for a well-known artist, and does that increase prices in the profession?
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of this particular moment is actually that there is a lot of emphasis on the very top end blue chip, but the middle piece of it is actually being squeezed very hard. And that's in the prices, but that's also in the galleries. And I actually think that we haven't had a big disruption in the art field yet, as most other fields have experienced, whether it's publishing or TV or whatever. And I actually think on the horizon is a very serious disruption for the mid-level gallery, because the cost, you spoke of the cost of having a piece of real estate that you have to continuously, feed in terms of exhibitions. Exhibitions are expensive. Real estate is increasingly expensive. So in a way, the migration, whether it's to art fairs as just simply places to sell work, or online, but then something will give, and more, I think quicker than we might have assumed.
Yeah, art fairs are very expensive to put up. It's more staffing and time and expense.
Yeah, but I think you may see galleries consider finding a way to go to art fairs without having a physical presence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about online? That's had such an extraordinary effect in so many different marketplaces.
It was good. It's something, I do quite a lot of panels and talks, and I'm always, if we don't talk about online, somebody in the audience always asked about the future of online. At the moment, it's about 6% of the global market, so it's a small amount. Will it grow? Yes. Will we see a $100 million painting sold over the internet in my lifetime? I believe not. But some people do. Obviously, anybody who runs one of those companies believes. I mean, I think it's great for the less expensive works of art, where selling it in any other way involves shipping it. So obviously, there's huge cost saving if you just have it on the internet. It's great for something that's really basically visual, like particularly a print, a photograph, something that's not a complicated piece of work to sell, that you can see it quite quickly. Click and you get it. That's great. But I think for a more expensive or a more complex work of art, I don't believe in the future of the internet for those works of art.
From an artist's perspective, it seems amazing to me that someone would buy a piece of art, particularly if it's $40,000, $50,000, without ever visually seeing it. Because we all know that art in an art book and art online does not represent what the art really looks like. And that, I don't know if that's the investor one coming into this market that doesn't really care, or whether or not it is a true collector or seen the work before or something like that. But just to go on for the first time and buy a piece of art online, I find stunning.
And yet I've met artists who've sold directly online without people seeing it. Somebody once said to me, well, it's like the difference between Skyping somebody and meeting them in the flesh. It is different. It's not the same experience, and you don't get that strength that you get when you confront the artwork itself.
But we should remind ourselves there are people who meet each other and decide to get married online.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody follows up, but the point is maybe they find it easier.
Yeah, I mean, back to your point, Georgina, I actually think that there is a kind of space for online, which is usually known entities. So it's an artist who you know, it's a print that you know, it's relatively low cost, so it's not high risk. I think that there's the room for online right now. And, places like the Warhol Foundation just shifted a large proportion of their inventory, for example, to Christie's online. Mm-hmm. So people are buying from India and all sorts of places where they wouldn't ordinarily have access to that. So, I mean, I kind of use my own thinking on this, which is I buy a lot of things online, but they're always things that I know already. You're not going to take a risk on something that you don't necessarily know. So
for example, when museum shops sell prints online, that's okay because everyone knows Nighthawks.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But on the other
Or a
hand, there are
photo-
people that are just...
Or an Albers, for example, something that you really know about. But let's not forget as well that online has got fantastic value for education as well.
Yeah.
Perhaps not just for buying, but these art sites that sell art also might have bios of the artists. They might lead you other ways to know more about that period. So, I mean, it's a huge resource in the art world.
Let me ask you... Oh, I'm sorry. Did you...
I was just like, the historian would like to point out that this is not a new development in a sense, because telephone bidding, which starts happening in the 30s, provoked similar kinds of concerns about buyers who are just acquiring. And I think I'm wondering about the online market. If
Sure.
it's
I
in
mean,
the
there
top
used to
tier
be
or
the
not.
big... I think there still is the big glossy magazine or publication you get from the auction house. You thumb through that. They open the bids by telephone. I think by Skype and every other thing now. And these are people who are thousands of miles away from the auction.
I think from a time when I went to art school, though, to today, one of the great things about the online and the internet is the global aspect of art today. You get to see it. Before, we had to go to the libraries and we waited this, amazing period to get the magazines in and even see some various art. And now you can see it all. It's all there and it's available to you. It doesn't mean that you know it, because you really have to see it, I think, a lot of the times, but it does give you a feel for what's going on in the world.
Let me ask you all about the... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
All right. What about the role of museums in this changing landscape? Are they still setting a kind of standard? Can they compete? Anything?
As the museum person, shall I speak up first?
It seemed to go to you first.
Vouching for... I think museums have always been thought of as arbiters of taste in some way.
Yeah.
And I think that by acquiring a work of art, in a way, you're undertaking a promise to preserve and conserve that work forever. And so I still think that museums, we take a much longer view in a way. It's thinking about art history and which artists who we think will survive. So that takes a lot of consideration. And I think what is interesting, especially for a modern contemporary art museum like the Hirshhorn, is that the contemporary art world moves so much faster today than ever before. We're looking at works on all across the world on Instagram posts from what's actually really happening, so in real time. And I think actually the real challenge for museums is how to balance the speed at which things are moving with the historical consideration. Museums are often on a slower time frame. We plan 3 to 5 years in advance. So, it's about, for modern contemporary art museums, it's about finding that balance between the long historical view, but also kind of staying attuned to changes today. Yeah.
What does it do to your permanent collection with the price of art the way it is, though? Do you have to depend more on donations, or can museums compete on that open market to get the kind of pieces that you want to continue to grow your collection to be a world-class collection?
Yeah, I think museums today have to be much more strategic about their collections. So what does it really mean for us to acquire another Rothko if we have a bunch of them, right? So I think that we can't compete in the current auction market, but where we can actually add value is thinking about where there are opportunities to actually collect, because smart collectors are actually not bidding at auctions. Smart collectors are looking for the opportunities where there is not a hot market around certain artists or certain media. So it's about finding that space where we can collect in depth, sometimes fairly quickly and in response, and then finding the right people to help us, because about over 60% of most donations of artworks to American museums are from individuals. Most museums are not acquiring works through their endowment or through funds that they already have.
And to be plain, these are people who buy a piece of art and you, as you say, work with them to persuade them to let you display it for a length of time.
Yes.
The last time a museum was responsible for buying the most expensive work of art was 1967, when the National Gallery got the Leonardo da Vinci that they have. So since then, it's been the private market that's at the top of the tier of the market.
And that's been since 1967. Oh, so there's nothing new about it. But as the art prices go up, I'm just guessing in a practical world, that also increases insurance considerations too that you have to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, the costs for museums, just business of running a museum, have gone up exponentially. So that's why I think, especially since the financial crisis, a number of museums are not doing the same number of international loan shows as they used to. So they're drawing on their holdings of collections to create exhibitions. So there's been a leveling out, I think, of those large-scale loan shows that we saw before the financial crisis. Yeah.
Well, it's really more a question to Melissa about the about deaccessioning, which virtually very, very rare in Europe, and in fact against the law in some European countries, but has been quite a trend in America. And I'm just wondering what your position is on deaccessioning. Deaccessioning being selling works from the collection.
Deaccessioning is always, it's the sale of artwork from your collection, with the provision that the funds from that sale only go towards acquiring more artwork. So it's not, so at no time is your collection seen as a fungible asset, right? So you can't sell a painting to fund a building, for example. So most museums have a deaccessioning, a deaccessioning program. The Hirshhorn was founded on having a deaccessioning program with the idea that modern contemporary art needed to have that kind of escape valve to actually be able to update its collection, right? And so we've always had that. I think that museums are always cautious and are very judicious about what they deaccession. I think some of the easiest deaccessioning processes have been around editions. So, for example, my predecessor, Jim Dimitrian, deaccessioned a number of works for which we already had duplicates or editions, whether it was in sculpture and bronze and things like that. So, I mean, I think it's a part and parcel. It's probably more pronounced on the modern contemporary art museum side of things, just because that's the way that that they work. But, you know, I mean, there have been controversies in the past, but museums in America, it's very much part of their thinking, in fact, yeah.
Do you think that will continue? Because when MoMA was founded, it was supposed to be a similar institution that would sort of process through its work after a 70-year period. They actually stipulated this, and then things would go to the Met. That changed as the value for contemporary art and modern art started to skyrocket. So is there pressure, you think, to kind of keep stuff in-house?
Yeah, no, I actually see it being the opposite. As the market is very high, what we've seen is the auction houses needing material for their sales. And so they've actually been very proactive about contacting museums that have, you know, certain works that they think would do well at auction. So there's a whole cycling through of works when museums feel like they need holdings in other areas, or they have many works. You know, there's a whole kind of consideration of what the collection needs at any point in time and what they have more of than that they don't need so much of. So,
I wanted to ask John, can you mention just a little bit about sort of the advent of the auction itself and how that actually even was birthed between London and the US, and that particular time of like the height of the Gilded Age, all of this incredible consumption happening around the art object, and how that actually, like, how did we get to where we're at?
I'd love to. It's really interesting material. So, you know, in the mid-19th century, auctions were often spaces where artists would have fire sales. They're just trying to liquidate their inventory. It was not seen as an especially high end of the market. And over time, this one group of former gallery owners developed this thing called the American Art Association, which starts off as a regular gallery, but very quickly they recognize that if they can stage sales as high society events, so they have these previews in well-appointed rooms, which, you know, auctions certainly wouldn't. The auctions that were in, like, London, for example, were looking like barns, basically, instead of the kind of elite domestic interiors that these new exhibition spaces were using. The sales were done in a grand concert hall in New York. They were heavily covered by the press, and you saw prices that had never been realized in America before. And so this really catered to a kind of new tier of consumer, the robber barons, the industrialists, who are on the same order of magnitude in terms of wealth. And I think that the popularity of the auction today for newcomers is a similar development, where you've got a kind of a new tier of wealthy people who prefer to shop that particular way.
And
Yes.
a little anecdote from Britain. There's somebody called Peter Wilson who took over Sotheby's, and he was very much the motor of taking auction from being what it was before, which was a wholesale operation for dealers, to going for the general public. And before he was actually chairman of Sotheby's, he asked the Queen to come to a view of things. And the other board directors, he presented this, and at the time there was a society magazine called The Queen. And the other board directors thought it was a great idea to have a journalist from the Queen. They were astonished when the Queen of England turned up at the private view. And it certainly had an enormous effect in moving auction in Britain, anyway, from being something that was not particularly glamorous to the extremely high-octane, black tie, smart evenings that they are now, invitation only.
I think Robert Scull's sell of his collection in 1972 was a watershed event, though, for a number of reasons. And I think for the artist in particular, it was the idea of the resale, the right to get a percentage back from it. The famous Rauschenberg confrontation with Scull after the exhibition, I think he sold it for $135,000, but bought it for $3,000. And it really brought home the fact that, and this is one of the few creative fields where the artist has no rights to their intellectual property in terms of resale value. Authors, musicians, all seem to be able to get, some sort of the percentage. And I think that was a really important point. And then all of a sudden, it took off from there. And I think
particularly for contemporary art, because the whole point of the Scull sale is that it's contemporary art. Until then, the auction houses were not selling contemporary; they were selling older art, old masters.
I want to make a note. Everyone has something to say. Picturesque quote from Jerry Saltz, the great critic, New York Magazine, who says, auction houses promote super expensive works by verified modern masters, pieces that should be in museums. Now the wealthy compete with museums on the trading floors, where speculation and spin turn masterpieces into trophies. And Jerry concludes, art auctions are vile pieces of work.
Well, I do think that's a little bit unfair. He's a wonderful writer, but you must remember that the very top end of the market is a very small part of the market, actually. They're huge prices, but there's not that many works of art selling at that. There's a whole bunch of works that you can buy at a much lower price.
Let me ask a question before we begin to go to questions from the audience. Is it a possibility in the different landscape that we seem to be confronting now that museums will lose some of the profile they have had as arbiters of taste, as institutions that help us understand, value, and define art?
Every time you go to an art museum, the frustration for me is they're totally packed in many cases, and it's really hard to even see the art. But I think there's a new dimension that's going on to challenge the art museums in a different way, and that is the collector who wants to start their own museum. The Eli Broads and even the Glenstone. I mean, here you got these fantastic collections of work that are really their museums, and they typically in the past, I think would have gone into a museum itself. They would have donated it. And I think that's going to be one of the greater challenges to the museums.
But I mean, that's what Isabella Stewart Gardner did. That's
to build their own museum.
Yeah.
It become more of a norm.
I guess she used her house, but I mean,
yes.
She didn't put it into the Boston Museum of Fine Art. She decided she
Duncan Phillips here in town did the same thing.
Most of those guys, it's posthumous. Like, so this institution, for example, happens right after Freer's death. And what's different now is that you have people like Eli Broad who are kind of actively managing their own institutions and their own legacies. So through the museums, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that many of my museum director peers see these private museums as a potential threat. I don't see that so much, because I don't see all of them as... So some of them may survive in posterity beyond their founders passing away. But many of them won't. In fact, many of them are just for the lifetime and enjoyment of those collectors. So eventually you'll find those works either going to museums or back onto the market. And for those that survive, then I kind of see many other museums, if you look just at New York, whether it's Whitney, Guggenheim, or MoMA, as having been founded principally as private museums that have evolved into quite public institutions. So I actually think for museums it's a good thing that we're seeing a kind of second iteration, a second generation of these kinds of institutions, in fact.
Why don't we turn to questions now from the audience? We do have a microphone, right? All right. Yes, sir.
I can't decide whether it's a good thing or a bad thing in terms of the corkroom that they weren't able to sell some of their works of art, not just to buy new material, but to keep the doors open. Why technically couldn't they do that?
Is that a question to me?
Anyone?
All I know is what I read in the Washington Post, so.
Yeah, I mean, both the Association of Art Museum Directors and to some extent AAM require that museum directors sign on to this idea, and it's a museum standard in this country not to sell artwork and treat it as a fungible asset to fund the operational costs or a building. And that bright line has been established because there's a thinking that then, every time things get a little tough, you'll end up selling the collection, which is essentially the collection is in public trust. So you are caring for that collection for the future. So the potential risk, if you sell works on a regular basis that can fund your operational, that it's a vicious cycle that actually eats away at your core mission. So that's the real reason why.
But let me interject here with a question that I know troubled me, not that I had anything to do with resolving it a couple of years ago, that was raised by the Detroit Museum of Art. You had, from what I understand, a very fine collection that in many ways the core of it had been put together in a time when the city was prosperous and a much more important part of the industrial landscape of America. And I could see the importance of keeping the museum. And I thought, in a sense, that was more important than keeping each and every individual piece.
See, most museum directors would argue that the collection is more important than the building.
The collection is more important?
That the collection is more important than the building. So why would you sell your collection to fund your building or to fund staff when really it's about the collection?
I just worried that there would be generations of school kids in Detroit who would grow up without that building and the art they would see and the experience of going to a place that held that art. That's what I was worried about. Yeah,
I mean, I'm one museum director. I think that
and not to mention the fact, I'm not sure I'd want to say to a wealthy person in Michigan, given all the afflictions they had in Detroit, you ought to spend millions of dollars on the art museum. Because
this is evolving into larger debates about the value, the philanthropic value, the value of museums, the value of art in society. And one of the arguments, of course, is that yes, there are many, many other needs for society, but one of the key things is that you need culture within a society in order for it to be a kind of important kind of civic society. These are tough questions for people, though, especially in an environment like Detroit where there are many, many needs. So
I don't know where the microphone is, so did you have it? Yes. Why not?
I'll speak loudly.
No. Microphone's coming. You're familiar with microphones.
Yes, I am. Wonderful, all of you. I'm interested and I'm a little obsessed with stolen art. Stolen actually from the people who were murdered in like the Holocaust, or Persian art that was ransacked from the museums there, things that are happening now with ivory and stuff like that. And I'm just wondering, with the advent of the incomparable prices that are happening now, does this affect the morality climate of how museums and collectors acquire art? Or is that something that you don't think is being affected by that? I mean, like, you know, the Austrian museum that owned the Klimt piece that was stolen from a murdered family, the Adele Bloch-Bauer piece, for instance. What are your opinions of that kind of the pricing?
I'm wondering, before we put Melissa on the spot again, if our artists have any.
I think it's one of the most outrageous tragedies that governments know that these things belong to other people and there's recourse to fix it. But the money, as you say, is so big in it that it hesitates them to give it back to the rightful owners or the family or the ancestries to the family. And certainly, as an artist, when you have a work go to somebody that really believes in your work, it's incredibly important. I have a friend that's a very famous artist that he's getting very, very old, and he was telling us one night that he had a person came up to him and he said, I want to buy your one of your paintings. And he said, what do you want to do with it? He goes, I want to put it in the vault. And he said no. He refused to sell it to him. But it's that type of attitude. You're really selling to someone that really believes in the work. And it's sad to see that these works that were from a family collection and really loved by that family get stolen and put on the secondary market somehow in the way it does.
The problem is that when a work is, particularly in the case of war loot, when it is restituted to the family, it's not going to one person. And one of the reasons that they're almost invariably sold now is because there are a number of heirs, and they unless the others can buy out. So that's why very often, that's why generally these things.
Well, I was thinking
to
of Germany's resistance to help out and really try to repatriate the work too. I mean, the rise in the value of art certainly has made it more possible for people to employ, for example, lawyers to go through the archives, which are much more accessible anyway since 1990. And to establish a claim. But these are complicated questions because very often you will have had a work of art that will have passed through a number of hands before it ends up wherever it ends up, in the hands of a private owner or a museum. And those people have bought it in good faith. So these are complex issues to resolve.
It'd be a great other panel, but you know, most of museums are filled with loot of one form or another, unfortunately, or forgeries, right? So, yeah.
London's Elgin marbles being a case in point.
And I remember talking to people, officers at the Louvre a number of years ago, who ventured what sounds like an unpopular idea, but they said, you know, a lot of that would have been disappeared if we didn't have it here, and then it would really be lost to the world. I don't know. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I'm a former staff member of the Art Institute of Chicago. I have a comment and a question. Chicago, the Art Institute just received in the last month a significant donation of over 40 modern and contemporary objects from the private collector Stefan Edlis. So philanthropy is still alive and well for whatever reason. And actually, just within the last few weeks, Mr. Edlis sold a Liechtenstein for $140-something million to buy more art. So
43 actually.
143. My question is, give or take. My question is how you feel, what you know about, and especially for Darren, the argument that some make about artist resale royalties, and that it's not necessarily the quality of the particular piece being resold. Is it the best Picasso, or is it because it's Picasso? Is it just because it's a Koons? And where does that stand these days, and how do artists in particular feel about that? Again, that's the artist would receive a royalty of a sale as it continues on in time, or his estate.
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, my work has never entered into the realm of the auction. But I know many artists who, you know, have this dilemma, and it's a very difficult thing, because you're right there in the belly of the beast, and your heart, you know, you are a player within this field of commerce, and yet it's more about the object that you've already put out in the world, as for whatever trajectory it's going to go on, is sort of, you're not really stewarding it anymore. You don't have you don't have ownership of it anymore, and
you do have the moral right over it.
But you do.
So you do have some rights.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So it's I don't know. I think that it's something where if the artist is able, actually during their lifetime, for that estate to be able to benefit from the trajectory of that object, I think absolutely it should find its way in some smallest token that the artist should still be part of this. I mean, there is great inequity in that right now, absolutely, and yet I don't know how that ever gets structured. I mean, I don't know how.
We have it in Europe. We have artists' resale right. There's a harmonization throughout the European Union, and it's a certain amount. It's capped, and it's a certain amount that's payable on artists who are alive or who are recently dead. The cutoff is 70 years before. Unfortunately, it doesn't work perfectly well for. First of all, you have to sort of know that your work has been sold at auction. The problem is that the bulk of artist resale right in Europe goes to the estates of people like Picasso, Miro, who absolutely don't need it.
Right.
Yeah. So there is a bit of a dysfunction. The thinking in Europe is that perhaps it would be better if it was just for living artists. That would be a more equitable system.
One of the things that's advertised about doing auctions in New York is you don't have to worry about that issue because the artist won't get a cut of it. That's why there probably aren't many in California, since it's the one place in the United States that does have artist resale rights.
Yeah, but they don't pay it. Nobody pays it. So.
You know, another part of this too, just if I can interject, is, you know, if an artist donates a work of art to an institution or to an auction, you know, a fundraising auction for an institution, they do not get the deduction of the value of just the materials. So whatever your canvas costs and your paints cost, that is absolutely all the artist can deduct. Where a collector who donates that same work of art has a full tax deduction.
Whistler would be aghast.
And that's an IRS. That's an IRS rate. That's in the tax code.
Yes. Yeah. It's currently. Yeah.
Oh mercy! I didn't know that. Not that the subject has come up. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. On the corner. They'll get the microphone to you. Oh, you have a mic too. I do. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure exactly how to couch this, but I'm wondering, what effect is anybody seeing that this is having on the artist? The artist who's working now, is he starting to produce more faster so he can make more money, and to the artist's decision of what to do with their art if they're a senior artist that's looking at their legacy?
I think it does have an impact. I think that the pressure to produce with all these art fairs, 200 major art fairs a year, yes, I think it has an impact. It's one of the reasons you see a lot of multiples now, is because they can multiply the work. And not all artists, but there certainly is a small group of artists who are producing for the market. There's no doubt about it today.
Let me enlist you. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, hello. My name is Meryl Seacrest, and I have a question for
You wrote
Georgina.
the great biography of Stephen Sondheim.
Yes, I did. And I have a question for Georgina Adam. Can she tell us how the free ports are playing rather an important role in the acceleration of art prices, if they are?
Right. Well, for those of you who don't know, there's quite a massive scandal developing in Europe at the moment over the owner of a Freeport. A Freeport is an area, it's a sort of bonded warehouse. There's one in Geneva, there's one in Singapore, there's one in Luxembourg that was opened last year. And at the moment there's a mega fight going on between a Russian collector, he's the fertilizer king of Russia, and the Freeport king, who's a Swiss businessman called Yves Bouvier. As a result, a lot of things are coming out. The Freeports are suspected, and at the moment the jury isn't even in, let alone out, that this will certainly go to court, there's a court case, is that it's suspected that these Freeports, where art is stored, hidden away, does not pay tax. It could be a place where tax evasion and money laundering could be taking place. We don't know at the moment. I don't think it's actually the Freeports have had an impact on art prices. I think they're in a way the result of the art prices, because Luxembourg, which it's a small country that bases itself very much on financial services, recently there's been sales of the details of people who are not paying taxes in these tax places like Switzerland, Luxembourg. So they've had to look for something else to do. And one of the things they've done is encourage these Freeports, which is a place where very rich people can store valuables. So wine, it's got a special, I visited it, it's got a special place for wine, it's got a special place for gold, particularly in Singapore. But as I say, I don't think these are a result, I think these are a reaction to the fact that art is getting very expensive and people are buying it as an investment and putting it into the Freeport. As to whether they're being used for money laundering and tax evasion, that we'll see when this court case finally comes to court, and then hopefully all will be revealed.
Yes, ma'am. Microphone's working its way to you.
I'm very curious about the value of much of the things that we see in museums of contemporary art, particularly installations and very complicated video shows. What is resale value and what is ongoing value of those works?
So you're talking about monetary value?
Sorry?
Monetary value,
well,
as opposed to symbolic value,
yes,
aesthetic value, social value.
Market value. I mean, are they sold to private people, an installation like that?
In museum shows, things are not for sale, in theory. I mean, it slightly all depends. But
they've already been bought by the museum for permanently? I thought they were shows of artists' work.
In theory, I mean, Melissa, well...
So the works on display at museums are not for sale. And so when you see them at a museum, they're either one of two things. They're either part of the permanent collection or they're on loan. So...
Let me, we have a number of people that have places to go. We have to bring the panel. We have one last question, I think.
Okay. So I actually like to go back to the original question that the director said, this is the story of art and money. And from Whistler's point of view, the artist should decide what the value is. And Director Chu said we want to preserve it from the historical point of view. And Professor Ott said we want to preserve the art from art culture point of view. And I believe
very dangerous to have someone like you here who takes notes and remembers.
Actually, yeah. Anyway, so I think this exhibition, particularly Mr. Waterston's effort, I believe one part of your effort is to raise this question. So from today's discussion, what we heard is a little bit depressing because what we heard is all the market decide about the value. So my question is, being a museum director, being an art historian, professor, or journalist, or artist themselves, and the society, what can we do together to sort of be the trend of not just let the market control the value of art?
One thing I learned very quickly coming out of art school was that art is a business. And when you deal with your gallery dealer, they set the price, they believe what it is. And sure, you can say that you want this or you want that, but it's unfortunate reality is that the gallery dealer, which you can call the market, is very much the person who sets that, and sets it based on what they think they could potentially get from that market. The artist would love to be able to price it at whatever it is, but they also may not get the money for it as a result of that. But it's something that I found very stunning in the art world. I worked for a very famous artist once, and I was told by a call that we got at the gallery when everybody was out for lunch, and the gallery dealer asked me, the gallery dealer asked me to find out what the price was on this very famous painting 30 years ago. And I called up the restaurant where the people were, and I said, look, this person wants to know what the 1956 version of this particular piece is. And she said, yeah, it's not a problem. There's a sheet underneath the table, and it was a one-page sheet for a 40-year career. It listed it by 1951 to 1955 by the sizes and by the prices, 56 to 60 by the sizes, by the prices. It really shocked me to see that that's the way an artist prices their work in that context. It was a reality check that it taught me very quickly that this is a business.
And size matters.
And size matters. People buy it by the square inch.
But you know, you don't have to be part of that mega bucks world. You know, there's small galleries all over the place that you can go and see exhibitions and meet the artists. So don't be so depressed. There's not one art world out there. There's not just Picassos out there.
Yeah, work directly with artists. Buy local, right? I mean, it's
buy local,
as with
yes.
other kinds of consumption.
Buy local.
So I think it's time to adjourn to the gift shop, spend money, give royalties to our panelists, and join me in a round of applause for Scott Simon and the panel.